Hello, everybody. I hope everyone is there and having a great time. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier. We're going to be starting in just a moment. I'll give a few seconds for everybody to catch up for the live Q&A, a Facebook live simulcast with the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. And I'm going to be looking forward to speaking with everyone and getting your questions and answering them. By the way, if anyone has questions, do please just mention, type in your question, or if you want to be added on so that you can be seen and ask your question live, please just go ahead and do that and let me know. I'm tweaking this as we go. So obviously this is always something that we want to, work on together. So, and I hope Facebook is not going to play games. If it does cut out for any reason, please just let me know, and I will be right on top of that as best I can. I can't control Facebook. It's always a bit of a pain, and I'm going to get into that a little bit today as well. Can everyone hear me? Can anyone give me a thumbs up or a text that they can hear me? Because I see everybody, and hello, Claudia. I see you're there. Can everyone hear me okay? Hey, Claudia, type in and tell me if you can hear me all right. Okay, good. Everyone can hear me. Fantastic. Then I'm going to get this started up. You guys should be able to hear the sound effects. If you can't, let me know about that. But I believe I got that part figured out and settled. So you should be able to hear all the sound effects that I do with the program. So we're going to be able to do that. So I'll start it up. We'll get started, and I'll get right to your questions. And we're going to have some fun today. So, and I thank you all for being here with me as we get this started. So let me get this, little intro done, and then we'll get right to it. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. Oh, crap. I took it off. Okay. Sorry. I cut off my intro a little bit. That's what happens when you're doing stuff live and you're trying to improve stuff. So it always happens. We'll deal with it. So folks, first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being here with me on the No Soundbites Allowed podcast simulcast with Facebook Live. I already see we have several people here. I want to thank Mike Tens for being on. Joseph Anthony, I see you're watching here too. I want to thank, there's also Maurice Taylor, you're watching, and I thank you for that. Susan Schneider. Hey, I'm glad to see you all here with me today, and I want to thank you all, each and every one of you. The applause is for you, all of my listeners on all of this, because you make it worthwhile. That's why I do this. So I wanted to start off today with a couple of interesting subjects. One of the things that really pissed me off, and one of the things I really want to get to immediately, is right this second, this morning, before I got started and I was getting set up for this, Facebook is censoring me. I don't know if a lot of people know that. I just put out a post about it. It's really upsetting. And I'll be real clear on this. Obviously, I've been doing political commentary for just about 12 years now. And I've had Facebook for, I don't know how many years. And I've been making posts constantly. And I rebroadcast some of the things I write at the mvass.com, my political blog, where I've been interviewing politicians and candidates for years and commenting. And I've put that on Facebook, and I've also reposted it and put it out as an ad so more and more people can see it. I've also gone and done podcasts, and I've taken those podcasts, and I've also used that and advertised it and put it out so more and more people can see that. And I had a podcast from this week, Wednesday, where I was talking about the events happening here in the Southern Tier, talking a little bit about the announcements by Nick Libis and also Assemblyman Clifford Crouch, talking about the New York 122nd District, the Assembly District here in New York. And it was just very odd to me because of the way it went. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And also in that podcast from Wednesday, I had unedited audio of a town hall meeting by Anthony Brindisi, who's running for the New York 22nd District. And he was taking questions from an audience, which I was part of. And I had received an audio clip, which is the full unedited, my question, Anthony responding, and then, and that was it. And I had two questions, and it's both of those questions in that podcast. And I analyzed that. Did he answer my questions? The answer is no. And so I went over that. And I put that out on Facebook so that people could hear it. And you can hear it and you can make your own comments on it and make your own conclusions on it. And the ad was approved. And then suddenly this morning, Facebook, after having it sent out to a couple hundred people, suddenly says, no, you can't do that. And that I'm not allowed to put out that comment, my thought. And I tell you what, that's censorship. It wouldn't be censorship. Now, I understand there's a question about bots and Russians and all that. And there's a lot of people who have questions with that. And that's fine. And if that was the policy of Facebook going forward, that they had stopped all of my ads, even the ones that I have ongoing right now, separate of that one, if they had stopped those ads and they said, well, you can't do political commentary until you're approved for that. That's one thing. See, that's a consistent policy and that makes sense. But they approved the ad and then they turned around and canceled the ad and said you have to get approval. That's censorship. Either it's approved or it's not. I can respect if they said it's not approved from the start and said you can't do that because we need to verify if you're a bot or a Russian or something else. That's one thing. It would be something that they said, we have a complaint that someone said you're not real, that you're not alive, or that something is wrong. That would be a question as well. They didn't do that. They approved it and then they stopped it. And that's censorship. And we should not let that happen. I don't agree with that from any company for any reason. Have a consistent policy. If it's approved, then it's approved. If it's not approved, it's not. If you stop it in between and deny the public from being able to hear something that you initially said they could hear, that's censorship. That's wrong. And I challenge Facebook to go through and check every single one of my sources that I provided, to listen to it, listen to that podcast, and tell me that there is anything in there that is, one, Russian, two, a bot, or three, not actually factual. The facts are the facts. My conclusion is my personal conclusion. We should never allow anyone, any business, to go around censoring people. So that's a little bit of a rant, and I apologize. That's on me. But that being said, and it upset me, and that's just from this morning, and I'm in the process of challenging it now. Obviously, we should be aware of that. So I do want to talk, though, about the New York 22nd race, the New York 122nd Assembly race, because there's a lot of interesting things happening with all of that. And obviously, that's something that's on my mind. I want to talk a little bit about Oklahoma, the Oklahoma shooting that happened, and contrast that to the other shooting that happened. And I have notes here, so bear with me. I try and keep up on all of this. And the Indiana shooting that happened, which was very interesting, happened in a school and was stopped by a teacher. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what's going on with North Korea and the flip-flop we see in some of the political circles being for and against, and they're just all over the place, and it's kind of weird. But before I do any of that, I want to say hello to Jeff O'Brien, who's just jumped on as well. Thank you for joining us here. And let me ask and let me mention, at any point, guys, just let me know that you have a question. I will go right to your question. I will answer it because that's what I'm here for today. Next hour and a half, I'm here to talk with you about what you're thinking because you guys are the reason why I'm on here. You are the reason why I do this. And again, I want to thank you for that because you're the guys that make it all worthwhile. Hi, Nicole. It's good to see you. So with that being said, Once I see a question, I will answer it. If you want to be on and just speak to me directly, just let me know. And I will, of course, add you so you can say it live as well on screen so everyone can see it. Let's talk about North Korea a little bit, because that's obviously a very big issue. I know a lot of people are concerned about this. We've heard a lot of stuff where people are saying, hey, North Korea, we're going to be in a war. We're going to be in a war. And we've been promised that we were going to be in a war since before the end of the election in 2016. I mean, since August of 2016, we've been told that if President Trump wins, we're going to be in a war. We're going to instantly be in a war. World War III is going to happen. Hasn't happened yet. But with North Korea, we were also told you can't talk to North Korea like this. You can't interact with North Korea like this. And that's just really weird. We were told that we have to use the same policy procedures with North Korea that we've been doing since the ceasefire, because we never ended that war. We have to use the same ceasefire tactics and politics that we've been using for 65 years, or 55 years, excuse me. And okay, that's the thought. And that didn't work. Appeasement doesn't work. It never has. And it didn't resolve anything. That's why they have the world's third largest military. That's why they've been working on nuclear weapons and shooting off all kinds of missiles and learning whether or not they can reach us here in the United States. Because just doing the same process, and I'm talking about every president, whether it's a Bush or a Clinton or an Obama or another Bush, we've been following the same process and getting the same result. And so President Trump came out and he went an entirely different way. He confronted them. He called their bluff. And we see since that time, as much as we've heard the Democrats, you can't say that to him. You can't threaten him. You can't call his bluff. This will get us into a war. And in fact, what actually happened is we wound up having negotiations. We're talking with them. And mind you, and I'm going to get to it, but we've seen North Korea give us three prisoners that they had held on to, that they had no intention of giving us before we actually called their bluff. We see that they've started talks and had conversations with South Korea, which they had never done before in any other president. They actually made moves forward. Now, do I trust North Korea? Not at all. Not at all. And do I believe that they are good actors in this? Not so much. I'm sure that there is a self-interest for North Korea that's motivating this, on top of the fact that they realize that they can't do the same tactics that they've been doing under this president that they've done under other presidents, because it hasn't worked. So we're seeing a very big difference here. Matter of fact, I was looking at an article, and bear with me as I bring that up for you. This was an article at Investors Business Daily, which was printed on May 14th, so very recently. And in that, we see that, and I'm looking for the exact quote here, David Brooks, who's on PBS, had been an anti-Trump individual, and he'd been speaking very much about it. And he said, where is it here? As he said, like it or not, a significant number of Americans are actually happy these days. They're making money, they feel safe, and they agree with the president's protectionist trade policies, like his call for more American jobs, and even his immigration stance. Now, and that was actually the California Democrat Willie Brown from the San Francisco Chronicle who had been mentioning this. So it's quite interesting. We realize that in the stance by President Trump, and I'm not saying he's a great guy. I'm not saying anyone should go out and have a beer with him. I'm not saying he's a fun person. But what I am saying is he is effective, which is why we elect presidents. That's why we elect any politician. Are you effective? And he effectively has made people feel more safe. He has effectively gotten more of our prisoners back home. And we are moving forward towards a more peaceful world, with North Korea looking to dismantle and or stop their nuclear program. You can't look at both sides of that and say, well, that's a horrible thing. We have some questions, so let me answer this. Maurice Taylor mentions, where should be the retaliation for the prisoner that came back almost brain dead that died. Oh, what? I'm sorry. It was a typo there. So what should be the retaliation for the prisoner that came back almost brain dead that did eventually die? Now, there were several prisoners that were sent back, and I believe you're talking about the North Korean gentleman who was sent back just on his deathbed, not the additional 3 prisoners that were sent back after that. So that's about 4 prisoners that were held by North Korea that we had received here in the United States throughout this process. And, well, that's a tricky question, Mo, and I'm glad you asked it. I don't think that we can. Now, yes, it was a horrible situation, and it's not good that we saw that one of our prisoners, one of the individuals, came back just because he died. That's separate of this actual negotiation. That guy was sent back, and let's look at what it really is. The reason why we received that gentleman, I forget his name at this moment, I can look it up, but he was sent back because they didn't want to have him die in their possession, because that would have raised up internationally. It would have been insane. All the nations would have uniformly joined our side and said, and just denounced this action in that they allowed him to die. And it would have been human rights, and it would be a justification for us to actually take more direct and militaristic action, because our citizen died in their possession. It was their fault, and there's no answer they could provide to that. So that's why they sent him back. So let's understand that. That's why we got that prisoner back, is so that he couldn't die in their possession, which de-escalates the politics of the situation, the international politics and the repercussions. So we can't take action on it because he didn't die in their hands. We got him back and he died here. Obviously, it was a consequence of their actions, but that means that now it's left in diplomatic hands. That's part of our negotiations and part of our discussions going forward. I believe that's also part of the reason why we got the additional 3 prisoners from North Korea back home in good health, because they believed that it was another offering. That was part of their, not a retaliation, but part of their appeasement, their apology to us for having someone die, is they gave us the additional prisoners who weren't dead, that while they were alive. So it's not a direct and clear line there. Most things in international politics are not clear and direct lines, sadly. But that's part of it. So part of their response to us and a part of their goodwill is, look, 1 prisoner died. Let's give you 3 more so that are okay, to show that, we're really sorry for that. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but does answer it. So at the end of the day, it's 1, we got 3 additional prisoners, and 2, we have that as part of our bargaining chip as we're talking with them in the diplomatic sense. But because we did receive him, we're not able to take a more militaristic action because of it. So it's not done, but it's still being addressed. And I want to thank Scott Stannard. I see you're here as well. And Cotton Panties. Oh, what a Facebook name. Okay. He's here too. And I thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone. So please, Mo, if I haven't completely answered your question there, please let me know, and I will try and make sure that I do answer it for you. Actually, every time I get questions I'm supposed to use, I have a little sound effect, and I love my little sound effects. I hope everyone knows too. I have one which is called the Inception sound. And so I usually like to try and throw that in before I answer a question, just to let everyone know there is a question. If that's a little too loud, by the way, let me know and I can tweak it. So I did want to get to that. So thank you, Mo, for that question. It's a great question. It is a little bit involved, and I don't think everyone sees that connection. So I hope that helps clear that up a little bit for people, because I know it was something of concern for me as well. So thank you for that. And I was saying also on the North Korea thing. So I was also saying, I find it very odd that we have so many people like Nancy Pelosi and some others who they were absolutely against us talking to North Korea in the way we were talking to them. And now we see that President Trump took the other side. He said, well, the negotiations, the discussions were not going forward well. There was a lot of doubt about how much of a good actor North Korea was being, how much they were actually going to show up for this. So he canceled the meeting. And now we have all of the politicians coming out, and they're the very same people who said we shouldn't be talking to them, or we can't do this and start this process, are coming out and saying, well, no, you can't talk to them. And I'm going to get to you in a second, Scott, that we can't. Now that we canceled it, they're like, oh my God, you can't cancel the meeting. That's horrible. And now because we canceled the meeting, North Korea came back and said, wait, maybe we can still talk. And it's working. It's a negotiation tactic. It's based out of business tactics, a hard line business tactic of negotiating with an aggressive counter business. And it's in that basis, and it's effective, and it's working, and we're suddenly, maybe we will have the June 12th meeting, and all of a sudden you're hearing the Democrats and those who have been opposing this don't know what to say because it's working. We have to have some faith in our president. And I understand when the president's wrong, we call them out. When they're not wrong, let's go with them and support them. Wait for the process to actually have some results before we start going, you can't do this, you can't do that, how are you doing that? And jumping from side to side as the process is still continuing. That's what I find to be wrong. But I did get a question, a comment from Scott Standard, so I do want to address that. Scott says, Michael, excuse me, I almost forgot. Yes, it's the Inception sound. I want to make sure I do that. So, for you, Scott. Michael, what were the questions that Brindisi was dodging? We don't need a big progressive like him in office. Okay. Thank you, Scott, for that. And Scott, let me address this. And this is going back to the initial thing that this is what Facebook is censoring from the public and trying to deny being put out there, which I am absolutely against all censorship. I don't care if it was a libertarian, a conservative, a Democrat, or myself, a Republican. No one should be censored ever. But let me address your question, Scott, and then I'll get to yours, Mo. Scott, what he said is, I asked him directly about his record. I asked him two questions. One question was in reference to his record on the Griffiths International Airport, which is the drone testing site, which was declined by the federal government for going into a pilot program, as we were promised, that he had promised us up to 2,000 jobs being created, which has not happened, that we would have in New York State up to $70 million in tax revenues generated, which has not happened. And I asked him one of the questions was to say, tell us, where is that? And he denied answering that question. He avoided it all completely. I also asked him about, the other question I asked him about was about his Utica scandal, the Utica hospital, which has cost $300 million. And I asked him to clarify, why should the public trust someone who is in the middle of a scandal that was revealed by Freedom of Information Act requests showing emails where he has stated, in his words, in his email, that he is going to shut down questions from the general public to achieve his goal of getting a hospital in a location that will require the eminent domain, taking away homes from individuals. So that is just horrible. That's a big deal, and he didn't answer that question either. In fact, he even offered a platitude to the unions in the area, saying that they would be included in this eventual end process of building a hospital there, except he failed to mention that this process is going to take 3 years, and he never mentioned how many people from the southern tier would be used to build this hospital in Utica, which I think is a big failure. You can't tell people, I'm going to create you a job, but I'm not tell them that job won't be even possible for another 3 years. And then you don't tell them, well, there's 1,000 jobs, but don't tell them, well, there are only maybe 5 of you who are going to get that job. That's a big deal. So I found those were the questions I was asking. That's what he did not say. If you want to hear in his own words, I have the exact unedited audio tape, which is on my podcast, which was on Wednesday, which has exactly every word I said in the question, every word he said in the answer, and also an analysis of how he did not answer it in detail. So please check that out for yourself. Now, I do want to go back, and Mo, I did not forget your question, and I do want to get to it. And Maurice Taylor stated, I'm sorry, that is a weak exchange. Someone virtually died in North Korea's control, but understand the need for diplomacy. But the issue I have is him going from Rocket Man to being almost the best buddy. Give me a second. I'm bringing it all up. Best buds. Talking tough, then backing up in most Asian nations is a sign of weakness. Mo goes on to say, but please continue the discussion. No, Mo, I thank you for that answer. I'm not saying that, and I agree with you. I have to tell you, I agree with you, and yes, you deserve, and I apologize. There's always sound effects here. Mo, I agree with you. You're absolutely right. It is weak. I'm not telling you that it's not. And a lot of international diplomacy is not about strength. It's not a strong answer. It's not even, sometimes not even adequate. And I'm not telling you that the fact that the fact that he virtually died in North Korea's control is the excuse. It's the reality. And that's the difference. A lot of difference about politics of what it is and what we would like it to be. The reality, especially in dealing with international politics where you have different cultures, different viewpoints, like you correctly mentioned, taking a very strong stance and then backing up, it is a Asian culture kind of perception, and we see that in the Middle East too, that is not necessarily well received. And so that is a correct thing. So you're dealing with a lot of things, and you'll never get the exact response you want. It's very, very rare. It's very difficult. I'm not saying that it's a great answer. I'm telling you that, to my knowledge, that's the best answer. And that's the answer that we received. It's not great. I don't think it's good. But I can't justify, if he had died in their possession, we could make a great case for military action. We can make a great case for having severe repercussions to them. But because he didn't, we can't. And that's just the reality of it. It's the reality of international politics. If something happens, you definitely can have a response. If that thing didn't happen, you can't. Even if the consequence is the same. You know, he still died because of what they did. It's still their fault. But because it didn't happen in their possession, it makes it entirely different. It's just the annoyance and the frustration of international politics. And it's the frustration of even U.S. politics. Very often, because you can't directly say, here it is, it happened, and so we can respond. It's, here's something that happened, and then there was a consequence of that happening, but you can't. You can't tie them together. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't like it, but I do understand it. And it's part of the diplomacy, and diplomacy is built on chips of, ooh, this thing happened, that thing happened. And so we add them all together, and that's why we want to get whatever we're going to get. It's never positive. It's never 100% of what you want, but it's the most of what you can get. Now, let me also mention, while I think, yes, we were talking very strongly about North Korea, I think that us saying we'll walk away from the deal completely, while it's walking back a bit, I think it's also still strong, because it says we're not going to do what presidents before have done, that we're not going to take the appeasement approach, that we're not going to beg them, any other international country or entity, and beg them to come to the table, that we need them there. And I think it's a strong stance, and I think it's not the strongest stance, but I think it's a strong stance in saying, if you're not going to play on fairly and honestly with us, that if you're not actually going to be interested in doing this, we're not going to do it. That's it. We'll walk away from the deal because we want a good deal. We want a good faith deal. that will actually happen. And if you can't have enough good faith to actually live up to meeting us on a date that you had already established we were going to meet on, then why are we even bothering with this? And it's a statement there. It's a statement. Now, is that the best answer? Maybe not. Is it the best approach? Maybe not. But it is an approach, and I think it has some value to it. And I think it's had, from the reaction we've seen since, where North Korea is coming back and saying, well, wait, maybe we can still make this meeting. Well, wait, that's not exactly what we're saying. We're not saying that we won't act in good faith, that we won't, and my chair's messed up, that we won't come to this in a fair way with a real outcome here. This is not just political talk, but there is some reality behind it. I think that he's saying, I think that means that he's been effective. Could he be more effective staying very, very tough? Yes. But in negotiations, you have your strong and weak moments. You have your strong arguments. You have your weaker arguments, and they go back and forth. I look at this, and I believe the president is looking at this very much from a boardroom kind of approach, a negotiation with another competitor, where you have your strong statements, your weak statements, you go back and forth a little bit, you bring in some public opinion and international opinion in this case. It's an ebb and flow. This is far from being over. So I think there's a lot more to go on. And I think it's still way too early to determine whether we are having an effective conversation yet, because we're still in the early stages of this, trying to shake out, are we both serious about this? I think that's the answer. So thank you, Mo, for that. Scott comes back and he asks another question. Scott says, do you think that some of the Trump-style comments that Claudia Tenney, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, she's the incumbent for New York 22nd District, the comments that Congresswoman Tenney has made could hurt her chances for re-election? That's a tough question. Wow. Okay, I'm going to answer that because I've heard this argument before, and I am familiar with it, and I do want to. That's a big inception kind of question here. So Scott, thank you for that, and let me answer you. There's a couple of parts to that, and I'm going to try and bring it all together. So first of all, President Trump has positive appeal with a lot of people who don't want to say that they agree with him. As was mentioned in the article, as I mentioned from his Business Insider in May 14th, a lot of people support the effect of President Trump. But a lot of people don't want to speak about it because of the personality of President Trump. And there's a big difference between the two. President Trump isn't well loved. A lot of presidents have not been well loved. That's not material. We've come to believe since about President Clinton going forward, that we're supposed to like the president that we have. We don't. That's not a factor. We don't have to like the president. And I see you, Mo, okay. Thank you, Mo. Thank you. Mo just mentioned that he's got to go, but I thank you for the questions. I thank you for, it was really important. And I thank you for that. But Scott, so the first thing is there's people who like the effectiveness of Trump and not necessarily the presentation of Trump. So that's a clear thing. So when we see people, and now anyone who has a very strong presentation, that they are very committed to a set of goals and a set of standards, when we see politicians who are doing that, they're called Trump-esque or Trump style or Trump 2 or whatever it is. And so that's what we're hearing from the other side, people who don't like that. Okay. In this case, we're talking about in the New York 22nd race, say Brindisi and Citizen Action, Antifa, that group, that far left side say, oh, you're like Trump, so we don't like you. What they're saying is they don't like someone who's very straightforward, who is very direct, who is very committed and consistent in their message. They don't like that because that's not a message they like. And that's okay. They don't have to like it. We're in America still. So they can oppose. They don't have to like that. But the thing I like to point out is whether you like the style of how they speak, and the fact that they're committed to a set of values is not necessarily why we elect them. Are they effective? And by the way, I believe that Congresswoman Claudia Tenney is very effective. And that's because she's put in 18 bills, submitted 18 bills so far. She's had 2 that have already passed the House and are going to the Senate to be ruled on and possibly turned into law. So that's effective. In fact, she's on track. And if I believe she's going to be in her first term, the first 2 years, more effective than we saw with Representative Hanna, whose only effective thing were 3 bills, 2 of them for baseball coins and 1 for naming a post office, and also more effective than Hillary Clinton, who in 8 years as a congresswoman, as quote unquote the most important and effective female Democrat in the nation, was only able to name a monument and a park, part of a highway. She did nothing. Okay. And that was in 8 years as a senator. So when we're saying Congresswoman Claudia Tenney equal, if not exceed, both of their achievements in 2 years, and it took 6 years for Richard Hanna, it took 8 years for Hillary Clinton, and neither of them were as effective as we're seeing right now. And in fact, Hillary Clinton promised 300,000 jobs. She lost 30,000 jobs in upstate New York. And yet we're seeing Congresswoman Tenney, through the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, have created more jobs across the nation. The unemployment rate has gone down. The number of people who are not counted for unemployment has gone down. So that's very big. Now, I say all of that to give you a context so that we can judge whether or not this is the claims against Congresswoman Claudia Tenney are effective. Because if all of that I've mentioned was not correct, then their statements would be damaging to her, because I believe there would be nothing effective. But because she is effective is the positive. I have to tell you, let's look at it from another way. Let me rephrase this so it makes more sense to a lot of people. Have you listened to some of the statements by Senator Chuck Schumer? Chuck Schumer is not a very pleasant man. He has a lot of statements. He's not always very pleasant in the way he speaks. Nancy Pelosi is not very pleasant in a lot of things that she says. Representative Ellison, who's out of Illinois, not very pleasant very often. And of course, there's also, and some of the other people who we've seen over the years, Representative Grayson and a few others, not very pleasant. Are they effective? Say what you will, and I have, about Senator Schumer. He's very effective in a lot of different ways, which is why he's continued to be reelected. I think reelected far more than he should be, because I believe in term limits for everyone, but that's besides the point. So would you say that he's very Pelosi-esque, or that he's very Obama-esque, or very Clinton-esque? No, people don't. Why? Because they're judging him by his effectiveness, and they're judging him on his own. When people are using someone else to compare an elected official unfairly, without regard to their effectiveness, that is just a tactic to distract and to try and run people away. What they're trying to say is, we don't like Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, and because they don't like Claudia Tenney, they don't pay attention to whether or not she's effective, and she doesn't want anyone else they don't want anyone else to consider, is she effective? And that's sad. That I consider sad, because they're saying, well, how do you feel? Who cares how you feel? Do you have a job? Do more people have jobs or not? Because how you feel, no one's asking you to go out and have a beer with Congresswoman Tenney. No one's saying that you should go out to dinner with her. No one's saying that you would want to date her or to have her as your best friend. That's not the job. Okay, we've gotten into this world in politics where somehow we're supposed to like all of our politicians. No, we're not. We're not supposed to like everybody. We're supposed to judge whether or not they're effective, because they're human beings, just like any of us. I've been on the campaign trail. Many of us have. It's not everyone's going to like you. You can't be liked by everyone. That's just a fact. Obama wasn't loved by everyone, even on the Democratic side. Neither is Pelosi. Neither is Schumer or Harry Reid back when he was in. That's not what they're there for. This isn't American Idol. This isn't about popularity. This is about effectiveness. Can you do the job, and can you do the job well? That's a big question. Can you do the job, and can you do the job well? And if that answer is yes, they are effective at the job and they are doing the job well, then that is a good politician. Whether you like them, whether you like the way they dress, the way they look, the way they speak, whether they have an accent or not, is absolutely unimportant. I'll give you a great example, Trey Gowdy. Representative Trey Gowdy. I think he's an excellent representative, and he's also very strong-willed, very strongly worded when he speaks. He has very defined values, much like Congresswoman Tenney, and he's also very effective at what he does. People don't like him. Is that because he's like Trump? No, he's not. Not at all. But at the same time, they don't like him. Well, that has nothing to do with whether he's effective or not. And his constituents were very happy to reelect him. And people have even considered him for Speaker of the House. I know that he's chosen to take term limits and to step away from politics. And I can respect that decision on his. I wish he would have gone for reelection. I think he's a great representative. And I think Congresswoman Tenney is also a great, effective representative. So that's how we have to look at it. So when people say, well, this person or that person's Trump style, let's say I'm Trump style. I've heard that before. Has nothing to do with it. I was around before Trump. I was doing this before Trump was around. Has nothing to do with Trump. I'm just a very strong-worded, strong-willed, very value-oriented person. The fact that President Trump is the same has nothing to do with it. So I know that's a little bit long-winded and I'm gregarious to start with. So there you go. But I want to give good context to this. And so do I think that this will hurt Claudia Tenney? No. Because she was the same person. If it was going to hurt her, it would have hurt her in 2016 when she got elected. Because it's the same person. The people who don't like her for just not liking her because it hurts their feelings, they would have already, the same thing. They would have gone away. And they didn't vote for her, and she still got elected. And they're still going to be the same people because it's not their argument is not based on a reality of effectiveness. And you know what? It's not American Idol. I have to say, it's not American Idol. So who cares? So I hope that answers your question a bit there, Scott. And you can look at, and I will be having an interview with Congresswoman Claudia Tenney coming up in the near term. Where I'll be happy to mention this to her and let her respond in her own words on that. I also have a request since May of last year, so over a year now. I have been waiting for an answer from Anthony Brindisi about doing an interview for him as well. And all of my interviews are always unedited, verbatim, so that it is complete context for everyone to know exactly what I said and exactly how anyone I speak to is answering. And I've done them with dozens and dozens of Democrats, Libertarians, Conservatives, Republicans. So I'll be happy to do it with him as well, if he ever decides to give me an answer. So far, for a year, he has avoided answering. It's not even, it'd be one thing if he said no, but he won't even say that. He just says that he'll think about it, which is a statement in and of itself, I think. So I hope that covers that for you. I should also mention that I think that there are a lot of people who are not in the polls, just as they weren't for President Trump in 2016. They're not counted in the polls, but yet they voted for President Trump. So I think there's that very silent group of people who are Democrats, who are independents, who are Republicans, who are not answering polls because it's not popular. And look at the media. Everyone gets beat up. I mean, Kanye West got beat up for just saying, I support my president. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? I mean, that goes also to the North Korea thing. Aren't we supposed to support our president? Aren't we supposed to hope that they have the right answer so that we can have a better nation? And yet, whenever you say that you support someone that the media doesn't like. Notice it's the media that's against President Trump. It's certain far left groups like Citizen Action that don't like Claudia Tenney. That's not the general consensus of the public. But they're saying it, and they're saying it very loudly. And so people who don't want to have to deal with that confrontation just don't answer. So I think that she's in far better shape than most people believe. Now, Scott has another question, and I hope that answered it all. I know, again, I'm gregarious, so I have long answers sometimes. I do want to, Zolayin, she's on, and I thank you for joining us here as well. Scott, I see, has another question, and Scott says, Brindisi, excuse me, I don't want to deny you there, Scott. There we go. Scott says, Brindisi probably will only respond as long as your questions are sent to him ahead of time. Well, then he's in trouble. And he will never, because that's never going to happen. I have spoken to Assemblywoman Donna Lopardo. I've talked to a couple of, in 2016 and 2014, the Democratic challengers, 2016 Democratic challengers, Republican challengers. I've spoken to a lot of people. In multiple races throughout the New York 22, 8 counties, especially in Broome County, candidates of all sorts. And I have never, ever, in any interview I have done with any politician elected or as a candidate challenging, I have never given anyone a single question ahead of time. And I never will. No one who should ever get the questions ahead of time. The only person that I would even consider giving a question to would probably be the president, because I probably couldn't. I mean, it's just me. How big is my audience? For me to get it, I'm pretty sure they would say, let's get the questions ahead of time. And even then I would argue it, because what I do prefer to do, and what I have done for every single person I have ever interviewed, is I will not tell them. At the most, is I will say, here is a subject you should know about. As an example, if you have a bill that you have, that I want to ask a question on, and it's a very specific bill. So I'm going to tell you this bill, the exact number of the bill. This is what you submitted or was passed, and you made comment on. Here's that bill. I'm going to ask a question on that, because I don't believe in gotchas. I don't do gotchas. So if it's something, when I ask in my interviews, when I'm talking to people, I'm speaking about things that are general items in the public that they should know. They're public comments, issues that are ongoing, current in the day. You know, we're talking about school shootings as an example. That's relevant in the current media, current issue. And I'm speaking to a politician tomorrow about it. Then I'm going to speak. Hey, let's talk about your position on mass shootings. Okay. That's a fair statement, right? That's not a surprise. It's not a gotcha. I don't need to tell you that. If you are a proponent of, for Anthony Brindisi, he claims that he is a proponent of the Second Amendment. Fantastic. So when I ask a question about his stance on the Second Amendment and what he has done as promotion of the Second Amendment, well, those are all fair questions. I don't need to prep him on that. But if I want to ask a question, say as I did, about not the Utica Hospital, but in reference to his bill for the drone center in Griffiths International Airport, and I'm asking him how many jobs have been created since he promised it. And I said, okay, there are articles. I will provide them to you. These are your words. If he was doing an interview with me, which I would like to see, I will mention to him, I want to talk about the drone site. And so that you should answer that. This way he knows. It's not a gotcha. It's his record. And this is a specific part of his record I want to ask. And I want him to give me the exact answer. So I want you to do your research and get it. Now, honestly, Anthony Brindisi, I spoke to him in Norwich on April 25th, and I asked him about the drone site and how many jobs have been created. He didn't know. On May 15th, he wrote a public article, a letter that he published to the federal government asking why the drone site was rejected from the federal pilot program. And in that, he doesn't mention how many jobs were created. And I'm still waiting. And when I spoke to him on May 21st, and I asked him again how many jobs were created, he still hasn't had an answer. So 3 times in a month, he has denied the public how many jobs were created. It's a very simple question. Either he knows it and doesn't want people to know because he failed in his promise, or he doesn't know it, which means he's ineffective in his job. I don't know which one it is, but I still want to know the answer. So if he's expecting that he's going to get a question from me ahead of time, no. The best he'll get is, I want to talk about this subject. And no interview should ever provide any candidate the questions beforehand. Ever. Ever. If you know your job, you can answer the questions. If you don't know your job, you can't answer the questions. If I'm being hyper specific, you deserve the right to know what the subject is that I'm going to ask that hyper specific question about, but you don't deserve that question. I will never give Anthony Brindisi or any elected official or candidate the questions ahead of time. Never. They don't deserve that. If you know your job and if you know what you're doing, you can answer the questions. If I'm going to be hyper specific, I'll give you the subject so that you can be prepared. But other than that, no. So I hope that answers that question. Like I said, I'm gregarious, so don't hold that against me. But I want to make sure I answer in full context and completely the questions that you have. And by the way, I should mention this. I do it this way because that's exactly how I ran for Congress. When I ran for Congress, I was prepared on all of the subjects that I knew. If it was a hyper-specific subject, I would ask the people who interviewed me, tell me about that subject, give me a chance to know what it is that you were speaking about, and I'll answer it. If you want to talk about healthcare, fantastic. I'll talk about healthcare. If there's a part of the healthcare bill at that time in 2013 that you want me to speak about, just let me know that it's that subject and I'll be able to answer the question. Even right now, I can answer questions. I'm not asking anyone. This is public. This is live. I don't know who's coming on and I don't know what they're going to ask. And I'm going to give the very best answer I can because I know what I'm talking about. These politicians and anyone who's going for an elected office, I hold them to the same standard. If I can know about it, you should too. I said this about Kim Myers in the 2014, Kim Myers was 2016 congressional race for the New York 22nd. And I said this to her live on air on WUTQ. Kim, if you can't answer and keep up with me, you can't be in Congress. I say the same thing to Anthony Brindisi. If you can't answer me, what are you going to do in Congress with people who've been there for decades, with issues that are massive, with more information? If you can't answer my question, how can you deal with any of the questions that are going to come from Congress? Unless, of course, if you're being a yes man to your party and just doing whatever the party says you should do, that's an entirely different thing. Then no, you don't need to know anything. You just need to approve what they say. Well, that's kind of sad. That's not being effective, and that's not representing your constituents. The constituents aren't answered by being yes man to a political party. That's not what you're elected for. I mean, that's a big deal. So yeah, and maybe it's unfair of me to say that I'm going to hold elected officials and candidates to the same standard that I hold myself. But that's how I feel. And I would hope that candidates do, that they know their job well enough and they're effective enough that they can answer the questions without having someone tell them what the question is going to be beforehand. Because to me, if you have to ask for the question, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. This is your job. You do it every day. I mean, this is what we expect of politicians. You do this every day. You should know this. This is what you're there for. And if you can't answer what you're doing in your job, I mean, if I ask you, Scott, or I speak to Mo, or I'm talking to anyone else who's listening here, and I say, hey, do you know what your job is? You can tell me. And if I ask you about your job, you can answer it. Do I need to give you a question about your job beforehand so you can tell me what it is? If I have to do that, then you don't know your job. You don't know what you're doing. That should be the standard. So if Anthony Brindisi needs people to give him the questions beforehand so that he can answer them in an interview, then he doesn't know what he's doing and he shouldn't be running. And I say that for anyone who's elected and or running for an office. You need to be told what the question is. You don't deserve the job. You don't know what you're doing. I did receive a question or comment. Oh, no, it was on a separate subject, not on the podcast. So no problem. Let me move on. And I want to, there are a couple of other notes here I wanted to answer for everyone. I want to talk about Oklahoma and Indiana because a lot of people don't know about it. A lot of people don't realize that this week there were 2 shootings. One was in Oklahoma. Hello, Manny. Manny, I'm glad to see you here. I'm glad you're joining us. I want to talk about, in Oklahoma, there was a shooting where 3 people were injured and 1 person was killed. And thankfully, the person who was killed was the shooter. And the reason why that Oklahoma shooter was killed and stopped before he could injure more people was because 2 good Samaritans, 2 regular people going down the street, saw the shooting, stopped their cars, went to their cars, got out their own personal firearms, confronted the shooter, tried to peacefully resolve the situation. The shooter would not comply, and they then got into a gun battle and took him out. That's the story. It's very simple, and you probably haven't heard about it. And that's an odd thing. We had a mass shooting, a lot of people contained in a restaurant. A mother, her daughter, and another child were injured by this crazed lunatic just shooting into a crowd for no reason that anyone can figure out right now. No one knows what the reason is, other than it appears that this person was mentally disturbed based on social media postings and videos talking about demons and such. That's the only thing we've been able to find out. This individual went in, started to shoot up people, and that's all we know. And I wonder, why was this not more national news? Why weren't we told about how lives were saved because this individual was taken down by armed citizens? And I think that's the answer right there. Armed citizens stopped a crazed shooter, and that's why you're not hearing about it. Because in addition, that shooter in Oklahoma, and by the way, I don't mention ever the names of shooters because I don't give them that respect. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve to be named. They don't deserve to be raised up. They're not glorified, and I will never do that. So it's a shooter in Oklahoma. The Oklahoma shooter there wasn't using a firearm, a long rifle, because the media loves to say if there's any kind of long gun or long firearm used in a shooting, they always tell you that it's an AR-15 and that it's an assault weapon, which is absolutely wrong because they're not machine guns, ever. No one has ever used a machine gun since the St. Valentine's Day massacre. So that's not real. And they always assume that it's a semi-automatic rifle. Even if it's a shotgun, they always call it a semi-automatic rifle first, or an assault weapon in their opinion. And they love to publicize that. And they always call it an AR-15 initially, even if it turns out to be something else. But in this case, they haven't, and when it isn't, they do what they did here in Oklahoma, and that is they don't mention the fact that there was any firearm or what firearm was used. NBC, and I wrote an article about this already. NBC, not a single word about the firearm that was used. Nothing. That's weird because they always love to mention what the firearm is. They always mention it. As far as we can tell, it's a handgun. They don't talk about that. They don't want to talk about that. They talk about the shotguns. They talk about the rifles, but they never talk about a handgun because it doesn't fit their mentality. You know, NBC in their coverage didn't even mention the fact that the 2 armed citizens confronted the individual, demanded that he put down his firearm to resolve this situation peacefully, to try and not have to engage. They didn't mention that. CNN mentioned it. I mean, God help us. CNN mentioned in full how both of the 2 armed citizens stepped forward and tried to protect the public and tried to preserve the life of the shooter itself. And when the shooter engaged them, firing at them, then they return fire, which goes completely against the argument that's made by those who hate the Second Amendment and who are trying to remove the firearms from everyone in America, piece by piece, type of firearm by type of firearm. What their argument is, well, citizens don't know how to shoot and everyone's going to die and it's going to be a horrible mess. And people with firearms are violent and they just try and go out and shoot people all the time. And that's not the case. And this proves it. Proves it. But you're not hearing about that. But you are hearing about in Indiana, a kid came into a school with a firearm. The firearm was taken away by the teacher. And you're hearing that story told. So I've had people say, well, no one died, so why should we talk about Oklahoma? No one died in Indiana. Why are we talking about that? Why is that getting more attention than in Oklahoma? Oh, because the teacher was unarmed and it was in a school. This was a restaurant affecting women, a mother, her daughter, another child, dozens of people in the location. Why isn't that getting equal amount of coverage as Indiana? Because Indiana plays into the fear mongering, that this is part of the manipulation, the emotional manipulation that is being used against the public, which I disagree with. Emotions are the worst way. Being emotional is the worst way to create a law. I don't care what the law is for. If you are wrapped up in anger or fear, you are going to make a bad law and its consequences will be negative. But the media wants that so that you will blindly go forward and say, oh my God, let's just put every ban, every restriction, let's punish law-abiding citizens for having a constitutional right because we'll have the illusion of safety. Because when you think about it, consistently, and this is a proven fact, California, Chicago, New York State, lots of places, they have the strongest gun laws out there, does not stop a single one of these mass shootings. Gun-free zones has never stopped a mass shooting. In fact, they invite it. How many times do you see a mass shooting in areas that are not gun-free zones? Almost never. Oh, by the way, Scott did have a follow-up, and he said, thank you. I like your show. I have to run and get some things done. Scott, I thank you for taking the time to listen to me and also to be involved and to ask your questions. I guarantee you, all of us, being involved, asking our questions, getting answers, whether you like them, you don't like them. The only way we improve is that we have these discussions honestly, fairly, and together. And that's the best way because that's how we get things done. We have to share our thoughts and talk it out. And sometimes we won't like that. Sometimes it's not comfortable. Sometimes you won't agree. Sometimes you'll be upset. But that's okay because the only way we get to a better place is by having these conversations, by asking the tough questions and saying, is there a better solution? That's the only way we can do it. And I can tell you, by not doing that, by just simply saying, okay, well, I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm just going to let the media, the 30-second soundbite, that political ad, I'm going to just do that because that's what the mob mentality is telling me. That's what they're making the mob mentality seem like. Because think about it, it's not the mob mentality. It's, the fact that you have, as an example, one that I like to point out. And people, you can check this out for yourself. Please do this as a thought experiment of your own. My experience has been that there are many fringe groups that are all the same people promoting the same idea to make you think that there is a consensus of thought. As an example, in the southern tier of New York, you have Citizen Action, you have Veterans for Peace, you have Antifa, you have Black Lives Matters, you have Indivisible New York. They're all the same people. Their leadership are the same people. The people that comprise it are the same people. They're all in the same groups, and they're all the same leaders, all with the same goal. In fact, what they're doing is they have these splinter groups and splinter names so that when they have an event and they can say, well, Citizen Action and Black Lives Matters and Indivisible New York and Antifa and Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow were all at this event. Well, that sounds like 5 different groups. Wow, there's a lot of people involved. No, they're all the same people. They're all in the same groups. It's the same core group of people. The same core group of people are involved in leading all of that. So you're really dealing with just one group. So it's not some wave of consensus of thought. It's one minority group. Minority as in the lack of numbers. This small percentage of the very far left of the Democratic Party, and I don't count them as the same as being Democrats. Their mentalities are entirely different. In fact, if you speak with them very often, as I spoke with Lawrence Parham, and I have an article about that when as a member of Black Lives Matters and speaking on behalf of them, and he's talking about how he's not a Democrat, he's a progressive. That's on video. You can go back and look at it. I believe it was November of 2016. And I'll put the link on at the end of this. But Larry Parham, when he was speaking about it, no, they're not Democrats. They're progressives. They don't consider themselves the same. But again, so this minor group, this minority group of individuals are using multiple names to give an illusion that they have some consensus and that there's this large wave, this mob of people to try and make others say, well, since there's this mob, I must join that. I can't possibly be the one person against that mob. And I disagree. Yes, we can, because they're using psychology against you. People don't like to be in opposition of the majority. People don't like to speak up against what seems like the majority. And when you do, very often you will find that that majority isn't a majority. It's a minority. It's a small number of people who are being very loud and or using tricks like having a lot of names behind them, but it means absolutely nothing. And they're just trying to bully you or use fear to motivate you or anger to motivate you to an outcome they want that if you had time to rationally think about it, you wouldn't agree with. I strongly believe that. And I know that's a political technique. Quite honestly, that is a political strategy. And it is a strategy that is very often used by the left. I'm not saying that the right doesn't do some of these things too, especially at the furthest parts of the right. But what is predominantly done by the left, the fringe of the left. And they do this on a regular basis, and they are actually very good at it. But it's about fear-mongering. It's about fear-mongering. You notice they never really talk about gun control and gun bans and taking away guns when there isn't a mass shooting. But if there is a mass shooting, they're all over it. They never quote numbers, the statistics, the reality. They never quote that. They never talk about anything that's real. They talk about how they feel, how you're going to feel. Won't you feel better if everyone has no guns? Because you'll be safe, except criminals won't follow that. They never do. Don't you feel better by having a gun-free zone? Except that's where all the shootings happen. I mean, the overwhelming number of shootings happen at gun-free zones. They don't mention that because criminals don't care. In fact, it's very possible, and it seems to be a correlation, that criminals target gun-free zones because there's no one there to oppose them. And they can have a target-rich area with no one being able to defend themselves. So it's kind of counterintuitive there to say that you're going to be safe in a gun-free zone when that means you're a better target. We see these all the time. Think about this. They don't want you to think about what they're saying. They just want you to agree. Just agree. And if you don't, well, you must be evil. You must be a racist, or you must be some kind of ism because you don't agree. Well, wait a minute. Actually, I'm just being rational. And I'm thinking through the logical consequences of what you're saying, and does it actually make sense? And add to that the facts that are publicly available and easily seen that show what you're saying is wrong. The conclusion doesn't happen. That's important. So it's very interesting. And Mo's back, I think. So I'm glad to hear him back. But I do invite people. And what I do with all of my podcasts, check it out, even though Facebook is trying to block it. Check it out. And what you'll see is that very often, always, I put in when I write my articles, I include links to well-received, well-known, highly credible sources. I provide direct quotes whenever possible. I provide the sources so that you can look it up yourself and make your own decision. We should all do that. We should all look at the facts, know the facts, and then make a conclusion based on those facts. Whether your conclusion is the same as mine is entirely different. It's America. You have a freedom to make your own conclusion. These are the conclusions I come to based on the facts that I am seeing and have seen over time. That's what it's supposed to be about. It's not about, well, you have to agree with me because emotionally, if you don't, you're an emotionally bankrupt person. You're a morally corrupt person. You're against the crowd. I mean, this is the argument that's being used in politics today, and I disagree with it. That's why I do these podcasts, is because no one should bully people by that. That is wrong. And to me, it means that any organization, any group of people, or any group politically that are out there saying, you have to agree with me, because if you don't agree with me, you're evil, or you're a sexist, or a racist, or an ism, that group has no credibility whatsoever. None. Because just because I don't agree doesn't make me morally bankrupt. Just because I don't agree doesn't mean that I'm a racist. It doesn't mean that I'm a sexist. It doesn't mean that I'm an ageist. It doesn't mean that I'm a whatever ist or ism that there is. It just means I don't agree. And what they should ask is, why don't you agree? Is there a reason? Is your reason valid? Because I have valid reasons. As you guys see and hear in my writings, in my posts, I mean, I've done thousands of articles. I have done hundreds of videos and podcasts for a decade. I have reasons. But yet, you'd be amazed how many times I hear someone say, well, you're just evil. Or, Mike, you're just morally bankrupt. Because I'm saying, here's my opinion. Here's my understanding. Here's my commentary. And that's the one thing I always disagree with. And I say, you don't have to agree with me. You don't. I'm not asking anyone to vote for or against anyone. Haven't. What I am saying is that never accept someone's fear-mongering or someone trying to use mob mentality or likes and feelings to try and get you to do something. Stop. When you see someone is doing that, stop and say, hey, why? Why are you coming up with that? Why are you using that tactic? And it's a recognized political tactic. Why are you using that tactic? What else is there? What's right behind that curtain that you don't want me to see? What is it you're hiding from? Because we can solve all the problems of the world. I truly believe this. We can solve all the problems of the world reasonably. If we speak. If we simply have conversations like this. And not because you're absolutely going to agree with everything I have to say, or that you're going to go into that conversation and everyone's going to agree with you. No, that's not going to happen. I do not expect that. No one should. What will happen is we're going to have a conversation. We're not going to like all of it. Not all of it's going to be correct in terms of what we think it should be. The facts will come out. And by that discussion, we will get to a better solution that everyone or the majority of everyone can agree with. That's what our system is supposed to be about. That's what the process is supposed to be about. It's not that I'm right, you're wrong. It's that I got part of the answer, you have part of the answer. Let's put them together and we have a better answer than either of us started off with. That's the result. That's what it should be. But when you hear people saying things to you and saying, well, no, you just don't understand. Really? We need gun bans. Gun bans will make us safe. Except they haven't. It's already been proven. It's already documented. The 1994 gun ban, it didn't work. It didn't make people safer. We had the same number of mass shootings that we had before and after. Gun bans in and of themselves don't work because criminals don't care. There's your first roadblock. Criminals don't care. You know, in the Santa Fe shooting, the kid made bombs that have been made, which are illegal since 1934, reinforced in the 1968 bill. Completely illegal. He made a bomb. Okay. So if that, in breaking that law, if a criminal is willing to do, or someone with criminal and malicious intent is willing to go so far as to make a bomb, do you think that the fact that he was going into a gun-free zone made a difference? I'm speaking about the Santa Fe shooting, but does it make a difference? If we banned this type of gun or that type of gun, we're trying to ban AR-15s. Okay. He didn't use one. Would that make anyone safer? No. He made a bomb, had a .38 revolver, and had a shotgun. Whether or not he had access to, the fact that he couldn't use an AR-15 did not make anyone safer. So again, let's look at the logic. Strip away the fear, strip away all the emotional, and look at the facts. The fact that we need to address is what caused, and I said this in the last Q&A podcast I had, is what is the question we need to ask is not, would he have had access to an AR-15 or a semi-automatic rifle, and would that have made it worse? That's not the question. Who cares? Quite honestly. The question should be, and is important to answer, is what makes a teenager, or in case of Oklahoma shooting, or in the Indiana shooting, young people decide that the only answer that they have available is to go out and kill innocent people. That is the question. If you're not trying to figure out what that answer is, how did they get to that conclusion, then you're not trying to solve the problem. What you're trying to do is have a political preference to a separate question, which is, do you like firearms? Who cares? We don't like this firearm, so no one should have that firearm. It is not going to make people safer. It is not going to stop mass shootings. They're two separate issues, two separate questions. So that's important, and I truly believe in that. Now, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I do want to speak more. So I do invite people, look at the coverage of the Oklahoma shooting from this week and the Indiana shooting from this week. And look at the difference in the way the media is portraying them and the amount of coverage they're giving. And then ask yourself, what's the difference? Because they both have a shooting. They both have no death. They both have civilians stepping up. But one promotes an anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment viewpoint, and one doesn't. And that, I believe, is the only difference. And by doing that, and if we look at it, two of them side by side, and say, why is one getting more media attention and the other is not getting media attention, that means we're being manipulated. Either both stories should get the same amount of attention, or both stories get no attention. But if one is getting more attention and one is getting less attention, then that's a bias. And that bias is meant to create a certain reaction, which is to use you emotionally to get a political preference. And that is wrong. In my opinion, that is absolutely wrong. And it's also detrimental because since it's emotion guiding the answer is wrong. It's always, always wrong. It always winds up being the least preferred result. But let me move forward. Give me a second as I'm going to take a sip here and let me do this. Well, another little sound effect for you. No, it's a different one, folks. But it's going to give me about 9 seconds here. Just to... Okay, so that's mostly all of the big subjects that I wanted to talk about here in this podcast today. And I know I've been having a lot of different answers from everyone, and I thank you for that. I did want to bring up that censorship because that's really important, and I really, really don't like censorship. I really don't. But let me ask you, what other thoughts? I know Mo and Scott have had a few questions, and I hope I've answered them. It seems I answered them as best I could, and I thank them for that because that's how we get things resolved. That's how we get answers in our nation. But let me ask, what other things are issues that people are speaking about, issues that are important and of concern to you? I mean, what else can we address? And that's what I'm just looking to see if I didn't miss anything or if there's anyone else who's had any comments here. And I see a lot of people, and if I haven't mentioned your name and I haven't seen that you're on there, I apologize and I thank you. I want to thank you for being involved in the process because it's very important. But let me ask, there's so much that's going on right now. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the New York 122nd race. That's it. And I don't know if a lot of people noticed. In the New York 122nd race, which is an assembly race, we have Assemblyman Clifford Crouch. And this is the part that I want to focus on that. He's running against, there's a candidate, Nick Libis, who's running in the race. It's a first-time candidate. Congratulations to him, and I hope he does a good job. And I like Assemblyman Clifford Crouch. I've met Cliff before, and I think he's a good man, and I think he's done a good job. And he's been in 23 years, and he's gone over a decade without a challenger. And my personal belief is every politician should be challenged, at least if not from the other party within their party as well. And I believe in term limits, even against people I like and who've done a good job. So I look forward to seeing this race. I think it's important. The thing that gets me, though, is I saw something this week that I just haven't seen before, and it troubles me. And it makes me ask a question. And that is that I see that Mr. Crouch, Assemblyman Crouch, in April announced that he would be going for his re-election. He's 73 years old, and he decided that he's going to go for re-election for one more term. Okay, fantastic. He has no challenger. No Democrat is looking to take him on. No Libertarian. Well, excuse me. There is a Libertarian I expect that is going to be taking him on. I may be interviewing them, and I'll get into that shortly. But what I do see is then on in May, I think it was the 15th, he comes out and he has a re-announcement of his re-election campaign. Now, the first time he mentioned it, no big deal. He mentioned it, covered by a couple of news stations, no big deal. No one really paid attention. No one cared. And no one came out and said, oh, well, we're supporting him and blah, blah. It was no big deal. But his re-announcement a month later suddenly came out and he had 50 Republican elected officials and other politicos come out and support him and say that they endorse him. That's odd. But not only because there's been 50 of these people, of these individuals who have come out and supported him, which is fine, except why didn't they do it the first time? Why didn't they say that in April? They said it in May. Why did he re-announce that he was running for re-election if he said it in April? Politicians, candidates, people in elections don't re-announce the fact that they're running. They announce it once and then they have further updates. They don't re-announce it. So that's odd. And that doesn't make sense. And then the fact that he had 50 individuals suddenly endorse him, why would you do that when you didn't endorse him the first time? And it's not like endorsements don't happen all the time. Candidates get endorsed all the time throughout a campaign, often and over again. But 50 all at once? I can tell you that's not just unusual. It's not even just uncommon. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen at all. To put it into perspective, for higher offices, say Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, the Southern Tier doesn't have 50 elected officials that have come out all together at one time to endorse her. She's running for Congress in one of the most contested races in the nation. A race that's going to raise more than $15 million and is already national news. And we haven't seen the Southern Tier rally together with 50 people all at once to say they endorse her. And this is a far lower office with far less of consequence. So that seems odd to me. Fred Akshar, State Senator Fred Akshar, doesn't have 50 Republicans coming out all at once and supporting him. And he's wildly popular by both Democrats and Republicans. And his last race, he was won by 71%. He's insanely popular. And he doesn't get that result. So I don't understand. Why did they suddenly have that announcement again? And why did they suddenly have those endorsements? And the only thing I see is that his challenger came out 1 week later, Mr. Nick Libis. And so this was a preemptive act before Mr. Libis could come out and make his statement. And that's a little bit worrying to me. It's, again, that mob mentality. Remember, I was talking about that mob mentality, that impression that is supposed to be made. And again, this is not about Assemblyman Crouch. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he's done a very good job. I think he's very well respected, and he should be. And he's been effective. I don't question that. I do question the strategy to try and create a mob mentality that says that you shouldn't have any other thought. That somehow this is already decided. I don't agree with that. I'd never agree with that. This is a Republican case where we're seeing it, and I don't agree with it. Something is off. And I strongly look forward to finding out more about this. And I look forward to, I've invited, and I again invite Assemblyman Crouch to come on to have an interview with me. I've invited Nick Libis to come on and speak with me and do an interview. Both of them, it will be unedited, verbatim, provided to the public so that we can ask questions and find out more. Again, I think they're both great people. I think they both have wonderful potential to serve the people of the New York 122nd. And I'm not telling, and there will, as I understand, there's a libertarian in the race, and I'll also invite that libertarian to come on and do an interview. I want to find out all sides and see all the choices there. And if a Democrat steps up and decides that they want to run, I will ask them for their interview so that we can make the best choice possible. But I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. We've got, well, look at that. It's 1:30 already. Wow, time flies. I tell you, folks, I enjoy doing this. I enjoy speaking with everyone so much. I really, really do. And you guys are wonderful. You guys, you make it all worthwhile. To be able to answer your questions, to go over everything with you, there's nothing better. And I do enjoy that. And I'm so thankful that you did this. I do invite you, every single one, to join up. Listen to my podcast. It's the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. It's normally shorter than this. And it's me speaking. Sometimes I have interviews with various candidates, and I will be having an interview with Assemblywoman Donald Lapardo coming in the short term. I do have an interview coming up with Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. That'll be coming up. I do have a couple of interviews with candidates for several elected offices that will be coming up on the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. You can also check out the SUNY Broome Republicans, another podcast which I am co-host of, where we also speak about the issues for SUNY Broome and SUNY Binghamton, and also not just politics, but just issues like the homeless awareness event, which I was able to be part of and speak for, to raise awareness about homelessness for students and the community. So that's something you can check out as well. Again, it's the SUNY Broome Republicans. That's a podcast. And there's also mine, which is the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. Please check it out. Be involved. Leave questions. I always try and answer them as best I can. I look forward to these opportunities. You can also check out my website, which is the mvass.com. And that has other material and articles that I've written. And that goes back over a decade. And if you ever do have a question, you can reach me here on Facebook. You can reach me on my Twitter, which is @mvconsult. And you can also email me at info@vossconsult.com, and I will do my very best to reach everybody. With that said, I want to thank everyone for having been here today. I'm going to give you some outgoing music, and I hope you enjoy it. And I look forward to next week answering your questions once again, because you all make it worthwhile. And I thank you.